Welcome to The Right to Reason. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. I hope all of you had a good Thanksgiving this week. I certainly did. Family, friends, and turkey. The episode you've all been looking forward to is finally here. This is the Reverse Debate. Joining us is a full lineup. Justin Schieber, Kelly Clemenson, and Hertzie Hertz, all joined together to really dig into the core arguments of the atheist-theist debate. We'll start off with the reverse debate, where I will be taking the role of the Christian apologist and bumping mics with famous debater Justin Schieber. This guy is the real deal. He's debated many names that you would likely recognize. One of them, Blake Juta, has been a guest on our show before. You may remember that, but I encourage you to check out Real Atheology and learn more about Justin there. All right. You guys ready to get started?
And let me assure you that we are going to take our fight for economic justice, for social justice, for environmental sanity, for a world of peace.
And I think it should be religion treated with ridicule and hatred and contempt. And I claim that right.
One aspect of American U.S. life and culture that I think that does deserve respect and admiration is protection of freedom of speech. The U.S. is unique in the world in that respect.
The cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
Quoting the Bible is not going to get you anywhere because you haven't demonstrated why anybody should consider the Bible to be true or authoritative.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Also, I wanted to thank Kelly Clemenson, longtime friend of the show, for joining us today. It's kind of funny because, while I'm going to be arguing for theism, Kelly is an actual Christian apologist, and he's going to be moderating the debate, keeping Justin and I in line, as it were. You've likely heard him arguing for creationism on previous episodes. You can find his work at the Areopagus Project. And Hertzie Hertz from Atheist Talk Radio is going to help me break down everything wrong with my arguments for theism. I pulled them right out of the Apologist Playbook, guys. Stuff you've heard before from the likes of William Lane Craig, Frank Turek, Kent Hovind, another previous guest, and all those other guys that you want to just punch in the face. I'm kidding. We don't do that. Well, Nazis. We punch Nazis. But that's it. The reverse debate starts right now.
Culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies.
We very naturally, as a cognitive and behavioral imperative, we form descriptions of the world and we try to figure out what's going on.
If you base the design of rockets on science, they reach the moon. It works. Bitches.
Today we have Justin Schieber and Kelly Clemenson joining us in this very anticipated and look forward to debate. I will be taking the role of the theist, ironically, as to many of my listeners. Mr. Schieber will be taking the role of the atheist, and Kelly Clemenson, returning back again, somebody that I have enjoyed having on the show multiple times. So happy to have you back, sir. He will be the moderator. Mr. Schieber, if you could introduce yourself, and then Kelly, if you could follow that up, we're all ready to get started. I think the listeners are excited about this.
Sure thing. So my name is Justin Schieber. I co-host the Real Atheology podcast. This is a podcast wherein we explore contemporary analytic philosophy of religion. And so we're interviewing philosophers, we're having debates, lots of good stuff on there.
Yeah, my name is Kelly Clemenson. I'm going to be the moderator today. I host a website called the Areopagus Project, and you guys can visit that. It's got some funny stuff on there. I'm a creationist, but I'm happy to be here with the guys just to hang with them and see what they have to say. Interesting take for me. I've never been a moderator before. I'm usually on the other side. We'll see how this goes. So we're going to have Justin Schieber on today. He is the host of Real Atheology Podcast, and Robert Stanley, who is the host of Right to Reason, two gentlemen that are going to square off today on the topic of whether God exists. Today's debate is opening 5-minute opening statements for each side. Then we're going to have a 10-minute question and answer, and then we're going to have a 5-minute closing on each side. Hopefully that will be an entertaining venture.
Thank you, Kelly, for that warm introduction. If I know the Right to Reason listeners, I know that many of you entered into this debate saying, I'm going to check my views at the door, and I'm going to assess the arguments as objectively as possible. I welcome your challenge because this is a question of God's existence. As much as it is a theological query, it's a philosophical and scientific one as well. It's all three simultaneously. I would expect that my opponent has a sharp and hateful disdain for religion and religious people. So I will do my best in the respect of this discussion and in respect to you, the audience, to not preach to the choir, but to argue my premise from a philosophical and scientific basis. Because I know you have no time for theology, so I'll come to where you are. I, for one, am not vitriolically opposed to those that disagree, and am happy to come to where you are, and as it were, sit with you, respect you, introduce you to my Lord and Savior. This conversation will provide logic, reason, and evidence for the God of the universe. I know that you, as free-thinking individuals, would require nothing less. I give you my solemn promise that I will meet your challenge. In order for my opponent to also meet your objective, evidence-based challenge, evidence-based, everyone, don't forget that, he will have to answer some questions. And I think these are fair. The question that our debater hinges on is there a God or not? You are presented with a theist and an atheist to make these points. So, to simplify our question, did the atheist prove atheism? Ask yourself this question throughout this opening argument. Did he prove that God did or does not exist? If he cannot, then he is simply wasting your time. He might try some dishonest mumbo-jumbo about burden of proof, or who knows, he might even claim that he is unable to prove a negative. But this is ridiculous. I can prove a negative right now. You're not hearing Queen's We Are the Champions. Remember that song? We are the champions. You're not hearing that right now. You're hearing me desperately trying to reason with you in an honest and open forum. Queen isn't here, and therefore I have proved a negative. It was that simple. That you have confirmed. So let's avoid these intellectual games and let's get down to brass tacks. That's why we're here, isn't it? You want plain and simple truth, and I want to give it to you. I'm not about games. I'm about victories. Do you know when I was a kid, I was actually kicked out of recess because I don't play. Okay, so I want to be real, and let's get real. Let's get some real answers. I claim the Bible has already presented them, but my opponent rejects the Bible, so let's let him answer a few questions of his own. He's obviously inclined to do so. That's why he's here. If he can't, then he is asserting himself as a hypocrite, and therefore he is not the kind of guy that you and I would or should trust. He's a used car salesman. My opponent is going to have to prove that things don't just happen from chance. And if they don't happen from chance, then we would all agree that they must happen for a reason. Can he explain the purpose of the universe? The reason, as it were. If he rejects reason, okay, if he rejects reason, then I implore you to consider the premise that does respect reason and evidence, and that is the argument that I'm presenting today. So let's get into it. Number one, to claim that the universe is here from nothing is claiming that from nothing something comes. Philosophy and science disagree. This is a faith-based claim, and I'm sorry, folks, but I simply do not have enough faith to be an atheist. Number two, the fine-tuning of the universe can, thanks to cosmology, be deconstructed to mathematical principles. If at any contingency the equations of matter in our universe were to be altered by but a hair's breadth, life would cease to exist. If the atomic weak force were to be altered by as little as 1 part out of 10 to the 100th power, we wouldn't be here entertaining my opponent's weak claims. There are only two possibilities: chance or design, random chance, and no moral absolute, or purpose. And remember why you're tuning in today? Reason. Nature's laws are reasonable. If they were not, science and philosophy couldn't exist. Logic requires design. Number three, if you're claiming that moral laws are not provided by a moral lawgiver, then the only conclusion is that morality is subjective. If morality is subjective, then how can your subjectivism state that my subjectivism is wrong? It's a silly premise. It's contradictory. Number 1, from nothing, nothing comes. Number 2, the universe scientifically is fine-tuned for life. And number 3, subjectivism and relativism cannot lead to justice or any reality that we would accept. Therefore, my opponent, rejecting the word of God, must explain how something came from nothing, that chance and evolution are able to explain life, and that morality is relative, fleeting, and useless. My Bible disagrees. If you cannot prove these 3 points, I would encourage you to accept my argument as open-minded free thinkers as you are, that we came from something, that science explains life, that you have the courage to say that there is a right and a wrong, that you will not live on your knees, that you will not go quietly into that cold night. We will stand and we will lift our hands together to our Creator, our greatest scientist, our lawgiver, our friend, and that subtle voice whispering to you right now. Strengthen yourself in reason and logic, and remember Micah 3:8. But as for me, I am filled with the Spirit of the Lord and with justice and might. Thank you, and God bless your decision.
Right on the button, Robert. 5 minutes. Justin?
All right. All right, thank you, Robert, for that opening. So Robert spoke of proof and my obligation in this context of this debate to prove atheism. But of course, proof is only relevant in mathematics and in alcohol. And so for that reason, I'm neither interested nor obligated to prove atheism to anybody. However, as an atheist, I gladly assume my burden of justification. Let's let the evidential chips fall where they may and see what comes out in the end. I will argue that atheism is a much better fit than is theism when it comes to the way the world actually is. Now, our time is limited, so I will limit myself to identifying one mutually agreed upon fact about the world and show that it favors an atheistic hypothesis over a theistic one. That is what it means to be evidence. So this is typically where my side starts talking about evil or suffering or the hiddenness of God. But these facts while they're certainly relevant in assessing the question of whether or not a perfect person like God exists, I think that we can go further back in the story and identify some more fundamental truths which count in favor of atheism and against theism. So first, I want to talk about the only persons that exist that we know of are human persons, okay, that we can mutually agree upon. Now, of course, humans are severely limited in their power, their knowledge, and their moral virtue. That is to say that humans are finite persons as opposed to infinite persons like God, if such a being were to exist. But this is quite odd. If God exists and is responsible for all other existing things, then there was at least some point, causally prior to all existing things, at which God existed alone, pure, and perfect. But if theism is true, then God must have moved to create a world like ours, filled with finite persons. But would that make sense? Think about it. What reason might God have to create anything if prior to doing so, everything was perfect? The only reason to create that would be compatible with perfect goodness would be to add value to the world. But given that God is the standard of all value, rather than create limited humans like us, God would actually create what philosopher Evan Fales calls perfect creatures. So these are creatures who, like God, are non-physical, all-powerful, all-knowing, and essentially morally perfect. But, of course, that is not what our world is like. It is not filled with perfect creatures. It's filled with a bunch of flawed human beings. The fact that our world is filled with these physical beings who are limited in power, knowledge, and moral virtue is surprising if theism is true. Or if theism were true, rather. But given that some persons exist, the fact that they exist as finite creatures, limited in all these same abilities, is entirely expected on atheism. Because on atheism, and here I mean a kind of naturalism, they must have come about and evolved through purely natural processes, and natural processes are only capable of creating finite creatures with limited capabilities. Infinite power is simply not within the repertoire of a naturalistic world unfolding in a causal way. there are a whole swath of evidences, but because our time is limited, I'm interested in focusing on this one, in this particular debate. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Justin. Appreciate it. So now we're going to move on to a period of question. So if, Robert, you would like to give it a start on the question side. Justin gave an eloquent defense of his position, even though he didn't seem like he needed to. So if you wanted to start for us, Robert, have at it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Look, most of our listeners would understand atheism to be a lack of belief in God, and agnosticism to simply be withholding belief until evidence is presented. Justin, are you an atheist or an agnostic?
I reject the lack of belief definition of atheism for reasons that I won't go into here, but suffice it to say that I'm an atheist in the sense that I believe that God probably does not exist.
Just to clarify, you kind of tried to twist that up a little bit, but basically you're an atheist. Is that fair?
Yeah. So there's controversy, right, about the definition of what atheism is. And so all I mean is that in whatever word you want to use for it, my view is that God probably does not exist. If that's an atheist on your definition, then I'm an atheist.
Right. So as far as I presented atheism to be, and most of the listeners would understand atheism to be as a lack of faith in God, then I would respond that you're likely wasting our listeners' time because you wouldn't accept evidence anyway based on your lack of belief. So let me follow that up with a question. That one
I go further than just lack of belief. I assert.
All right.
That
Well,
God...
I mean, this is my time for questioning, but that may have been a little bit difficult. Here's an easy one. If Christianity were true, would you be a Christian?
So that depends on your definition of Christian. What I believe.
Once again, it seems that we're being offered a lot of difficulty answering the question, though.
Well, okay. So if what we mean by that is that Christianity, if what you mean by Christian is that I would believe that Christianity is true, then yeah, I would be a Christian. But
no, I'm asking
kind of
if it were true, if it were a fact, would you then decide to be a Christian? Would you want to become a Christian? Yes or no?
So I would believe in Christianity, but I would not be a Christian in what that usually means.
Then you're saying that even when you know something is true, you would still reject it. So I hate to do this, but I have a follow-up question here. Why should the audience respect the words of a man that would reject truth?
Well, so there's a misunderstanding going on here. When you ask me if I would become a Christian, there's different things that could mean, right? So what I'm saying is that if I knew Christianity was true, I would believe that Christianity is true, but it's a different question of whether or not I would seek relationship with God. I find the character of God in Christianity to be abhorrent, and so I would not seek a relationship with God, even though I knew at that point Christianity was true. So that's hopefully a clearing.
Well, I don't think Christians feel that way, but if that's how you characterize Christians, that's fine. Here's 3 quick questions for you. What is more likely, in your opinion, Justin, that an author wrote a book, or that the book was written by someone that isn't the author, that a painter painted a picture, or that the painting wasn't created by someone or something that isn't the painter, that the universe was created by a creator, or that the universe was created by a non-creator?
Well, on that question, if the other option is a non-creator that fundamentally, definitionally leaves out the possibility that it could be the creator. So obviously in that question, which is a loaded question, the creator would be the answer. But of course, not only does that question...
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
All right.
I think you would agree that a creator created the universe. Is that fair?
No, I would not.
I'm sorry.
But of course, nothing
I thought
about
that's
your
what you
prior
just
question.
said.
No, nothing about your prior question even suggested that. So, when you asked me what's more likely, that a creator did something or that a non-creator created something, well, the second part of that question is incoherent. So the first part of that wins by default in a trivial boxing match. So what I'm saying is that if we're talking about the actual world, I don't even buy the notion that it was created at all. So the question's loaded from the beginning, and it's one that can be rejected outright.
I kind of fear that whenever you say loaded, you're kind of playing semantics. Let me come at it a little bit simpler for you.
Just a second.
Is that time?
No, not at all. I just there wasn't something answered there, Justin.
Sure.
Kind of got hung up on the universe part, and I understand. Intriguing.
Okay.
But what about the book and the author and the painting and the painter? Robert did pose those, and I don't think those were addressed.
Right. Could Robert go ahead and rephrase the book question there?
Yes. Fair enough. What is more likely, in your opinion, that an author wrote a book, or that the book was written by someone that isn't the author, that a painter painted a picture, or that the painting was created by a
someone who didn't paint the picture?
Yes, sir.
Right. So remember, just like the universe example, the second half of those questions, they're incoherent. You're asking whether or not a book was written by someone who wasn't the author of that book. It's an incoherent concept, right? So by default, the beginning of that question wins, right? But that has, of course, no implication upon what our debate is here today. So this is largely a distraction.
That's the end of my question time.
Okay. All right. I want to discuss some of your arguments that you gave in your opening statement. So the first argument you gave was about the universe, and you talked about how from nothing, nothing comes, right? The universe had to have a cause, and of course, your position is going to be that God is what is ultimately responsible here. Now, this notion that from nothing, nothing comes as a kind of causal principle that you're advocating here. But I worry it's a bit too vague, and so let me offer a more precise example that will, I think, make sense of our intuitions, of the sciences, of our real-world experience. So here's the principle. It's metaphysically impossible for a concrete object to come into existence by an efficient cause if it lacks a material cause. So essentially what this is saying is that it's impossible for something to occur or to come into existence if it did not, if the pieces that make it up were not already existing. Essentially that they were just rearranged into whatever new thing. So if you talk about a chair, well, who made the chair? It's not that the chair came into being from nothing. It was crafted out of pre-existing materials, out of wood, out of whatever you make a chair out of, right? So the principle here is that it's metaphysically impossible for a concrete object to come into existence if by an efficient cause if it lacks a material cause. What I'm saying essentially is that ex nihilo creation out of nothing is impossible. All things that come into being out of material stuff, pre-existing material stuff. So I actually want to say that God creating out of nothing is impossible. So I actually think that this argument supports my view, because if theism entails a kind of God creating out of nothing, and that's impossible, well, then that supports atheism.
I absolutely agree with every point you made, and I think that you're making one fatal flaw in the same way that the Bible references if you build your house upon the sand, your house is going to collapse inevitably. We would all accept that. That's obvious. That's common sense. But in the same way, your foundation is flawed, sir, in the sense that you are using laws that were defined for man, in the same way that sin was defined for man, in the same way that morality was defined for man. You're using the physical laws of the universe that were constructed for us so that we could function and use our lives to glorify our Lord and Savior. You're using these laws to try to define the ontological nature of the divine. He didn't define the laws for himself. That wouldn't make sense. And for you to make this claim, you would have to say that God created the laws with which he exists. How could that even be so if he existed eternally?
Right. So here's the problem I see with that kind of answer. When you say that these laws are for humans, these things I'm referring to here, what you're doing is you are implicitly bringing in God in the back door and therefore inserting the existence of God into your premise, which is to beg the question against my argument. What I'm saying is that the causal principles you referred to were vague. I sharpened those down, and now you're wanting to resist the notion of bringing in causal principles. Well, you can't do that. You're the one who first started to talk about causal principles. I just improved the argument for you, and it turns out that once you do improve it, it supports my point.
Would you accept that physics is based on cause and effect?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, obviously some of it, yeah.
Okay, well, I would say all of it, but that's fair enough. In that same sense, even with quantum physics, as it were, cause and effect is not just significant, it's a necessary role in how we understand the mathematics with the discussion that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And every causal,
but there is no reason.
Every effect is material, right?
Absolutely. But God is not. And therefore, your sense of cause does not play a factor in the eternal. And your sense of effect does not play a factor in the end material. And you're forgetting the most important factor here, the spiritual.
Sure, but none of that has any weight toward making any of that true. You're just making claims here, right? So the original point here was that you were using causal principles to try and prove God. And I was showing that once you actually look at the causal principles, they actually make God impossible.
I don't know how familiar you are with Latin, but the term atheist is not too hard to understand. It's atheist. It's no theist. So whenever you're saying I'm making a claim, no, I am reasserting a claim that all humanity, throughout all history, and you can go back to any point in history, any point in archaeology, and find that there have been forms of divination, of theological concepts all along.
Yeah,
okay?
This is not relevant, though.
I think it is. If you'll let me finish, the point is that you are a theist, no theist. Theism is the respected approach, the null set, as philosophical terms would apply here. You are rejecting it, and therefore, whenever you say I'm making a claim, I'm simply reasserting a well-known fact. You are rejecting it. You are the one making the claim here, sir.
Okay, we're going to move on now. This is my question time. So let's talk about your third argument, the moral obligations argument. So philosopher J. L. Mackie points out one problem with attempting to account for moral obligations by placing them at the feet of God. He writes, quote, "The commands of a legitimate ruler do not create obligations. If such a ruler tells you to do X, this makes it obligatory for you to do X, only if it is already obligatory for you to do whatever that ruler tells you. The same applies to God. He can make it obligatory for us to do Y by so commanding, only if there is first a general obligation for us to obey him." So the notion that we can have all obligations grounded at the feet of God is actually incoherent, because we don't have the general obligation for us to do what a God would say in the first place. And that is an obligation that cannot be grounded in God. And so if we have to allow this, then we have to say that there are some obligations that are not grounded in God. And if we allow for that conceptually, then there's, of course, room for the naturalist to say, well, why not several obligations that are kind of intrinsic, that are irreducible normative truths. So essentially the point I'm making here is that most meta-ethical theories out there do not invoke a divine hand, and nor should they. Apologists that I think forward these arguments, they do little other than show their ignorance of the state of contemporary meta-ethics. This third argument is just a doozy.
Where you're going with that is really fascinating. Talking about ethics, and I'm sorry if I come off a bit cocky here. That's not my intention. I want to have the humility of my Lord and Savior, as he would instruct me to do so. But I'm sorry. I feel very confident in my answer here, because I have the moral ground to do so. And allow me to explain before you pass judgment, before you say, oh my, and before you get the eye roll as the typical atheist response to this. I can explain this properly. I have to follow up with a simple question. Do I have the authority to exert my physical will on another human being, even if they're not doing something wrong, even if they're not doing something violent?
I'm not. Is this your question time, or is this my question time?
It's your question time. I just thought it might be easier to explain, but it's okay. I'll continue. Boy, what was it? It was last Thursday. My sweetheart of a daughter was playing soccer with me in the front yard, and the ball just, I shouldn't have kicked it as hard as I did, but I was trying to impress her, and it went right across the street. She goes running after it, all right? She's 11 years old. She doesn't know any better. She was doing nothing wrong as far as she understood. Car was coming right down the road, and guess what? I grab her by her arm, and I yank her back, right back onto the lawn, okay? In that scenario, I exerted my authority onto her, and in that moment, if she had a million years to think it over, just before she realized the car was coming, she probably would have said, you know what? That guy was being a jerk. He grabbed me by my arm, and he pulled me and yanked me, and it kind of hurt a little. And she would be morally justified to do so in her limited understanding of morality. But she doesn't have my understanding of morality. And in the same sense, sometimes it's easy for us to judge God in our limited time frames, in our limited understanding of morality, but he is the moral lawgiver. And sometimes he yanks us and pushes us, and sometimes there's things that we can't understand in ethics.
We've gone so far afield of the original argument here. So your original argument asserted that moral laws, that moral obligations, they are found in the nature of God. This is a philosophical claim about metaethics. Right now we're talking about normative ethics. This is a sidestep here. So I wanted to talk about metaethiks, which is what your argument was originally about. Is that the argument you want to continue with?
Can I here just for a sec?
Sure.
Yeah, Justin, you brought up the idea of obligatory rules.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's what Robert was getting to.
Right. He's talking about the philosophical foundation of moral duties.
Right. So that obligatory rules, I think Robert was trying to get across that idea that someone with a more complete knowledge of the situation might make up rules that we don't particularly agree on at the moment, but later upon reflection might be advantageous.
Right, which addresses a very different question from the philosophical foundations of duties.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get into the...
That's my only concern.
Okay.
So please restate your question. Maybe I missed a point, but I think I defended ethics properly.
Well, I'm not. Well, I actually at this point I'm really confused about what your argument is the claims your argument is making.
Absolutely,
so
and I think that's the problem, is that the atheistic philosophy of ethics is quite confusing.
No, that's not what we're talking about here. I'm saying I'm not clear on what your argument is, because the statements that you are making, that you are making in defense of your argument and in the unpacking of the initial argument, they appear to be going every which way. They're not coherent. I've not been given an argument to bite into.
Can I offer an explanation that maybe you'll accept? And
sure.
That is that my understanding of ethics and morality comes from a lot of investment in prayer and Bible study. And you're coming from a place that you have not invested that kind of time as Christ has required, as the Bible has asked for. So whenever you say, I find this to be confusing, well, of course you do, Justin, and that's okay. Nobody's judging you for that. My Lord is not about judgment. My Lord is about acceptance, and he accepts your ignorance. And I'm sorry I used the word ignorance. I don't mean offense by that.
Dandy.
But
here's the
you're
problem,
going to have to put in the Bible study to get to these difficult things.
Right. So here's the question. Here's the point here being made. In the context of a debate, we can talk about what you believe, and that's fine. But what this originally came to was an argument that you made about moral obligation to the existence of God. That was the inference you were making. Your beliefs and how you believe you came to these things, that's irrelevant to the soundness of that argument. I've been attacking the soundness of that argument, and you've been moving the goalposts and changing the subject to normative ethics, to where you get your moral reasoning from. Those are secondary issues to the core argument that you initially made in your presentation, and that's what I wanted to focus on.
I'm sorry, I thought they were foundational.
When we're talking about moral duties, that was what the center of your argument was.
Is your claim that the origin of morality is not consequential to how we determine what is moral? Is that your claim?
Well, they're certainly related. So in that sense, they're consequential, sure.
Yeah, and I don't think they're just simple relations or correlations.
But
I
in
think
defense
it's
of your
causal.
argument,
I think that your whole claim of causality comes right back full circle to the causality of our morality.
but so notice that, again, we keep going in these bizarre directions here. Notice that when I questioned you about the coherence of talking about and grounding moral duties in God, you started to talk about how you get your moral sentiments from Bible study and prayer and how this connects with the divine. This all, of course, assumes God exists. So this is nothing but begging the question. This is, of course, a logical move that is not allowed in a debate like this. So at this point, I fear my time has run out, and I've not been even able to get you to provide a coherent argument in the first place with which I can interact. So that's a missed opportunity, I think.
Okay, guys, we're a little past time. So at this point, we should get into the final closing statements. Great debate, guys. Proceeded along nicely. I think some folks are going to enjoy the exchange. So, Robert, why don't you give us your final?
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Clemenson. I don't know if anybody else picked up on it, but it seems like Mr. Schieber is requiring me to be an atheist in order to consider his point. He said, there's no way that you can be a believer and still make these claims because you're arguing from a place of believing. Well, I can't help but believe since I am a believer. My opponent has been given a relatively simple set of questions to prove his point, and he has failed to be able to answer one of the questions that I gave him, that we came from something other than nothing. Can science explain life? Is there right from wrong? That should be pretty easy, I would think, right? He missed the train at every stop. We tried to get back on track during the question segment, but the only thing he seemed to prove is that his sales pitch can't answer the tough questions. And when challenged, he only proved himself to be dishonest. I think we would all have to conclude that he needs to come to grips with the moral, logical, and intellectual arguments he is presenting. Frankly, I heard what I expected to hear today: colorful phrasing, misrepresentations of the Bible and science itself, and unfortunately, rhetoric. But little intellectual engagement with the substance of the argument. At the end of the day, I think my opponent should be reminded that these questions are important and that the audience cares about what he says. I certainly did, and I was let down. It should not have been taken this lightly by him. All right, so what did we find out today? Well, you've been patient and you waited on some answers, so I'm going to give them to you. Here come some answers. Get ready. Write it down if you have a bad memory like me, right? We didn't just poof into existence from nothing, and maybe it takes some reasoning and humility, but the fact that you're listening with your valuable time today shows that you are reasonable people. Science can and has explained life, and an honest inspection of the Bible will support these explanations. Finally, there is such a thing as right and wrong, and you're proving that back to me as I speak, because right now you know that you have the choice to make the right decision. 1 Corinthians 15:33 tells us, do not be deceived. I doubt that my opponent's deceptions have worked on you. You're too smart for that. And it took him an hour to figure that out, didn't it? I would encourage my opponent to reflect on this interaction and consider accepting Christ as his personal Lord and Savior. I will yield the remainder of my time to my opponent, as he will need it. He has wasted my time, and he has wasted yours as well, and he needs to explain himself.
Justin.
All right. Okay. Well, this has been a bizarre interaction. So if you recall, my opponent provided three arguments in his opening statement, the first of which was the universe from nothing, the claim that atheism entails a kind of universe popping into being from nothing, and that theism can only explain this. His second argument was the fine-tuning of the various cosmological parameters to be within a narrow life-permitting range. And the third argument that he provided was about moral obligations, the philosophical grounding of moral obligations. He says that God can be the only provider of such obligations. I've rejected these arguments. I want to start with, again, a review of my first objection here. I argued that it is actually impossible for God to create a universe out of nothing, and I did this by appealing to a causal principle that was far more defined and precise than the causal principle given to us in support of the original argument. This entails that God does not exist, if it is the case that theism entails a kind of creation ex nihilo. His second argument about fine-tuning. Well, philosopher Jonathan Weisberg argues that because the existence of life was already known prior to the discovery of these constants being what they are, and because life's existence entails that the relevant parameters would be within the life-permitting range already, the only new information that the fine-tuning discoveries have provided us is that the life-permitting range is narrow rather than wide, and unfortunately, theism as a metaphysical posit doesn't actually provide us with any expectation about the narrowness or the wideness of the life-permitting range of cosmological constants. And so as a result of this, observations that the range was indeed narrow rather than wide, they don't actually evidentially support theism at all. And while it could be argued that the existence of life itself provides some evidence for theism, the actual observations about the constants being narrow rather than wide don't actually provide any additional support on top of it. Now, as to his third argument about moral obligations, we could talk all day about contemporary meta-ethics, naturalistic ethics, or contemporary non-natural ethics, or as I would rather say, irreducible normative ethics. These are different schools of meta-ethics, and they are all non-theistic, and they have no problem making sense of moral obligation, of moral duties. And so these are simply not arguments that are taken seriously by contemporary meta-ethicists. But thank you for the interaction today. I wish it had gone more smoother.
Justin Schieber and Kelly Clemenson are both professional debaters, and I am so happy that they came over here to help me out today. I am not a professional debater. I debate people occasionally on my podcast, and these guys do this for a living. I think they really legitimize this discussion, and I thank them both for being here. One more time, I know that the listeners would probably like to get in touch with both of you or learn more about you. Justin, can you start us off? And Kelly, can you finish us up? And let us know how people can contact you and learn more about the work that you do.
So, again, my show is Real Atheology. It's a philosophy of religion podcast. And so on there, we are talking about theism, we're talking about atheism, we're talking about other religious concepts, and we're assessing them as to the evidence in their favor. And you can find us at realatheology.com. You can find me on Twitter at realatheology, and I also have an Instagram account. I'm constantly interacting with these various philosophical topics, and so I invite you to do it as well.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. My name is Kelly Clemenson, and I run a website called the Areopagus Project. I'm on Facebook if you guys would like to visit me there. My last name is spelled Clemensen. I am a creationist, but I like to have conversations. Hopefully they're evidential and not emotional, but whatever that way comes, that's cool. So I appreciate Robin letting us come on and participate in his universe, and I thought he did a great job, even though coming from an atheist, defending the theist position. Did a good job, Robert. We'll win you over to our side.
Hi everyone, Michael Shermer here. You have a right to reason, and you're listening to Robert Stanley's terrific podcast. Have a good day.
This is Blake Junta. I'm a Christian apologist, but I am glad you're here because you have the right to reason.
Hey, this is Dave Blair, rocking out to you, and you're listening to Right to Reason with Robert Stanley.
I ain't gotta do nothing. I just gotta pick my stuff up and move on.
How am I supposed to talk to you people if we don't believe the same thing?
But don't you see, you've already taken the first step, the hardest step. You're listening.
This is Jason Camo from A Lost State of Mind, and you're listening to The Right to Reason.
My daddy told me that I had the right to reason.
This show is not over. In fact, it's just getting started. Justin Schieber of Real Atheology and Kelly Clemenson from the Areopagus Project did a great job. In just a minute, we're going to hear from Hertzy Hertz of Atheist Talk Radio. But first, I wanted to remind you crazy people that you can watch the show on our YouTube channel. Also, if you care to join the conversation, hit us up on Twitter at Right to Reason 1 or on our Facebook page. You can find all those links at therighttoreason.com, along with lots of other stuff like Gigi's Spot, where Gigi has specially selected charities that she has researched to confirm their legitimacy. So that's a way that you can make a difference in someone's life. This broadcast is always free to listen to, but please know that it is not free to produce. We need particular members of this audience that are willing and able to support us at patreon.com/right. That's patreon.com/right. Okay, it is now time to talk to Hertzy Hertz and break down all the flaws of my arguments today. All right, we are back with Hertzy Hertz. Hertzy, happy to have you.
Happy to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So I was hoping you could help us out figuring out everything that was wrong with the apologist side of that debate.
How much time do we have again?
I didn't want to play like the whole debate again, but just kind of key in on. Well, I don't want to play the Justin stuff much at all. His stuff was just on point. Would you agree with that? I thought he did a great job.
Yes. He did a great job.
Yeah, he always does. I don't think he was treated very fairly.
There did seem to be a little bit of bias with the moderator. Yeah. Admittedly, if I had been moderating, I might have had some of the same whatever, but then I actually did debate in high school, so I probably would have been more about time and, okay, you have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and that's it.
Okay,
that's
so
all I would do.
If I had been in your high school debate class and acted that way, what would have happened? Academically speaking, like would it have just been like, okay, stop, you failed the class.
Well, see,
you can't do that.
Okay, so we did Lincoln Douglas debate, which is a philosophical debate, and I was not in there for very long, just so you know, and I didn't get a whole lot out of it. So Lincoln Douglas debate is actually kind of an elongated version of what you guys did. You have your opening remarks, you have question time, and then you have remarks again, I think, as secondary questions, and then closing remarks, if I recall correctly. And
yeah,
I'm sure
it was opening questions and then closing.
Yeah, and you have breaks in between some of those places because you're actually making up all of your arguments and such. Well, not making up, but you're plotting and saying figuring out what you're going to say during the debate. So you would actually have a couple minutes break every so often.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think actually it would have been fairly similar from my experiences.
That's cool. That means that I'm as good as a high school freshman debating. I got that going for me. All right. Somebody from junior high, bring them on. I will destroy them. All right. So here I'm just going to start playing it. And if you need me to stop at any point, go ahead. I'm going to be stopping throughout. Either way, because I don't think we're going to make it very far. And I'm going to fast forward most of the Justin stuff. And sorry, Justin, it's just that this whole point is to well, okay, before we do that.
Let's just be honest. He was too good. We can't critique right now.
Yeah, well, hey, I did okay too. Thanks a lot. God. But the idea here is if any of these arguments were convincing whatsoever. I mean, we have some Christian listeners on the Right to Reason. Most of us are atheist listeners, but maybe if you had heard something that, if you're sitting around, Thanksgiving dinner, passing the mashed potatoes and Aunt whatever were to bring up one of these points and you would have a hard time answering it. That's what Hersey and I are going over and saying, like, why there's a flaw with this. It might seem like some of the points I made might seem intuitive, where argument from nothing kind of stuff like that. So if there's anything here that you thought, that wasn't bad, well, we're going to show you why it was just completely awful.
We're going to hopefully show you. I'm here to make jokes.
All right, here we go.
And saying
Interesting take for me. I've never
All right,
been
here's
a
Kelly.
moderator before. I'm usually on the other side. We'll see how this goes. So we're going to have Justin Schieber on today.
I thought he did great.
Real Atheology Podcast, and Robert Stanley, who is the host of Right to Reason, two gentlemen that are going to square off today on the topic of whether God exists. Today's debate is opening five-minute opening statements for each side. Then we're going to have a 10-minute question and answer.
Wrap it up,
and then
Kelly.
We're going to have a 5-minute closing on each side. Hopefully that will be an entertaining venture.
Thank you, Kelly, for that warm introduction. If I know the Right to Reason listeners, I know that many of you entered into this debate saying, I feel like I think I'm speaking to an audience here. Is that the vibe you're getting? Like, what?
You sound like a preacher.
Because this is a question of God's existence. As much as it is a theological query, it's a philosophical and scientific one as well. Query, that's a fun word. Simultaneously. I would expect that my opponent has a sharp and hateful disdain for religion and religious people. So I will do my best. And the
That's one thing I've heard.
Right there. That one, I think, like, nobody thinks that.
Well, okay, so that's the interesting thing that I've seen is there's reality and perception. The reality is I don't hate religious people. I have problems with religion. But there are people who would think that I hate religious people, and it's like, no, I hate some of the things they do.
I think the other thing is that if you are an other, you are different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's easy to make judgments about someone that's different. And in the same sense, if you identify who you are with your religious beliefs, and your religious beliefs dictate morality, then anyone that isn't believing the same thing that you believe is a priori immoral.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually, is you know, obviously I'm trying to be a little bit hyperbolic in that part, but during the debate rather, but that's not too far from my experience of speaking with Christians. Not that they're just blatantly rude like that. They're often pretty polite, especially if they're apologists or in some form of a debate, but just day-to-day stuff where you say, you know, I don't believe because this, and this, and they'll say, well, yeah, you know, you want to stay in your sin, or sure, well, you know, you just have to seek the Lord, or maybe you haven't studied the Bible, or maybe and whatever it is, it's a negative. It's never an understanding of, okay, well, if I thought what you thought, I would be an atheist. So let's talk about what you think. That would be an honest approach to me that I would appreciate, but I don't get that. I don't get that. If I put myself in your shoes, I would think the way you think. So let's talk about what you think. That would be someone I would want to talk to. You know, I think that would be an effective method of evangelism.
Yeah, that would definitely be more interesting, at least.
Yeah, because it's not judgmental, Hertzie. That's the thing is, but I think that deep down, they can't avoid being judgmental a little bit. Now, they might not say it, you know, but I think for someone that bases their morality, that combines their morality with their belief structure, and then if you don't believe what they believe, they have no way of preventing themselves internally from making moral judgments about you. And it's kind of like the closeted racist in that same way, where they're not going to drop any N-bombs on somebody. They're not going to say something inappropriate at work. You know, they're going to, but deep down they can't stand those other people, you know, you people or whatever, you know. I think it's kind of like that. Did I just say Christians are racist? Close.
I think I was going to say, I think you compared them to. For me, it's the holier than thou attitude.
I don't think Christians are racist. Just for my Christian listeners.
No.
And my racist listeners. We don't want to forget about them, Hertzie. They're important. To acquire, but to argue my premise from a philosophical and scientific basis. Because I know you have no time for theology, so I'll come to where you are. I, for one, Nirvana reference. Vitriolically opposed to those that disagree, and I'm happy to come to where you are, and as it were, sit with you, respect you, introduce you to my Lord and Savior. This conversation will provide logic, reason, and evidence for the God of the universe. It will not do any of those things.
No, it doesn't, and it drives me nuts.
Nothing less.
I give you my solemn promise that I will meet.
Okay, so basically this whole intro doesn't have any points in it. It's just a bunch of typical cliche intro stuff. So.
Oh yeah, so I will note that how do you know we are not listening to Queen? Because you do make mention of that.
Oh yeah. Well, I actually have an opinion on that one that I wanted to bring up, but I guess that's not what I meant though. Queen isn't playing other than me, but I guess you could be listening to Queen on your headphones or something. It could be playing. What if that? How funny would that be? Like right in that moment, "We Are the Champions" was playing.
I actually wanted to try and see if I could sync it up so I could get like one computer to be playing it while I was listening on another, just so I could be like, "Ha, you're wrong. I am listening to Queen."
And record it. And, like, right at that moment, be like, "Robert, I want you to hear something," like, play it. That'd be very... All right.
Questions. I think these are fair. The question that our debater hinges on is there a God or not? You are presented with a theist and an...
Okay, that part's at least true, and this is something that you'll get a lot from apologists, is state something that we both agree with, and then whenever they restate it, they state it incorrectly or differently to favor their argument, and that's exactly what this typical argument does.
Atheist to make these points. So, to simplify our question, did the atheist prove atheism?
Well, right, anytime somebody says to simplify the question was already simple.
I know.
You didn't have to simplify it. Or they'll be like, to rephrase. Like, nope.
You use that so many times.
Did I really? I didn't even notice.
Oh, when I was listening, I was like, why are we rephrasing this? I thought he was able to figure it out. Now you're going to try and rephrase it so you can change it just enough.
I do that in real life, too, because it makes the wife sick. She'll be like, so what you're saying is I shouldn't do the dishes? Or it never works. I never get away with it. She doesn't let that happen.
No, because I was going to say, if that was me, it'd be like, go do the damn dishes now.
So he says, I say, the way to rephrase this or simplify it is to have the atheist defend atheism. So this is obviously just a switch in burden of proof. Could we agree there?
Yes.
There is no way to, in my opinion, actually Justin would disagree with this. Have you heard his talk with Ozymandias Ramses the Second, I think, or so. I don't know. If your name is that long, I'm gonna forget your whole name. But anyway,
I was just gonna ask if he was part of the Watchmen.
But he's a really sharp guy. I think he even went back and forth with Dillahunty before. But he argues that we can defend atheism. So I would encourage anybody to go to Justin Schreiber's YouTube page and find where he was speaking with Ozymandias. Fantastic discussion. It's about 3 or 4 guys going over that. I disagree with him, but we're atheists. Yeah. We can disagree and still talk it over. So.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it for me, it's one of those. It's not even a indefensible thing. My thing is, it's not my job to prove your thing.
Yeah. Or disprove your thing. Yeah.
Exactly. You need to prove this, because anything I say, you're usually going to twist or cherry pick, or you're going to do something. So you need to tell me how this is real.
Yeah, and it's an impossible scenario for just having a polite discussion anyway, because it's like what you said, anything you say. So if you say God did this in the Old Testament, and that was a dick move on his part, and they'll say, well, I don't believe that. Okay, or they'll be like, that's not the God I worship. Or, all right, so there's no way for me to do this, but then you want me to try. Like, it's a silly proposition altogether.
Oh, yeah.
Ask yourself this question throughout this opening argument. Did he prove that God did or does not exist? If he cannot, then he is simply wasting your time. He might try some dishonest mumbo-jumbo about burden of proof.
Mumbo-jumbo?
Who knows? He might even claim that he is unable to prove a negative. But this is ridiculous. I can prove a negative right now. You're not hearing Queen's We Are the Champions. Remember that song? We
There it
are
is.
the champions. You're not hearing that.
Did that sound anything like Freddie Mercury to you?
No.
Why did I attempt that? Why?
Because you're a showman.
Lord.
If you think about it, I think pretty much all of us podcasters are showmen to a point. You know, whether we're at a screen or something, we still want to entertain.
But clearly I did not know my limitations there.
Well, That is part of the learning process.
Yeah.
Right now, you're hearing me desperately trying to reason with you in an honest and open forum. Queen isn't here, and therefore I have proved a negative. It was that simple. That you have confirmed. So let's avoid these intellectual games, and let's get down to brass tacks. That's why we're here, isn't it? You want plain and simple truth, and I want to give it...
And the problem with this is the same argument William Lane Craig made... who was he going up against? I don't know if it was Hitch. It might have been Hitch. But anyway, he was saying, of course you can prove a negative. I think the analogy he uses, there's something like there's not a horse in the room or something like that, basically the same idea. And these are two different things. And once again, this is that same old strategy of let's present it one way, but then whenever I explain it, I'm not going to really be explaining the exact same point from the initial premise, right? So saying that there is not a horse in the room, therefore I'm proving a negative, is not talking about anything on an ontological level like we are with God. So you can look around the room, you can see all the physical ingredients of the room, as it were, right? And see that there isn't a horse because you have all knowledge of the room, right?
But so usually these things take place on stage, right? Because I'm going to challenge this a little bit. Because if you can smell the horse and you can hear a horse, those are evidence that there is possibly a horse in the room because you are hearing and smelling a horse. You could even be blindfolded and then feel the horse. And even though you can't see the horse, you're still pretty sure there's a horse in the room.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And it's one of those sorts like you can. There's still some room in there to be like, okay, just because I can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Right, but in the same way, the argument is a totally different argument. Whereas you're saying, I know what's in the room, or I have my senses about me. I can use empirical data to determine. So we don't have any of that with God. And you're not asking, is God in the room right now? You're asking about whether or not he exists itself. I think it's better characterized with like a teapot analogy, or the
celestial teapot.
Yeah, something like that. So it's not the same thing.
Presented them, but my opponent rejects the Bible, so let's let him answer a few questions of his own. He's obviously inclined to do so, that's why he's here. If he can't, then he is asserting himself as a hypocrite.
Wait, did I miss my joke? I missed the joke. That was the best part. It was the worst part, but it was only the best part because it didn't land. Like, did you get that vibe too? Like it was not funny at all?
Yeah.
Like as soon as I had something written down like that was like more of a build up for it, but it just didn't. I don't know. It just didn't play out whenever I was actually talking to Justin. So
it made me think of Monty Python when they're on that bridge. It's like, answer me these questions 3.
Yeah. No. I mean the joke about I failed recess or something like that.
Oh, that I think it's a little bit later. I think it's after the questions. Because I actually noted that.
Exist.
You're like, we have to talk about this, Robert.
He might try some dishonest mumbo jumbo about proven negative. Obviously inclined to do so. That's why he's here. If he can't,
all right, whatever.
He is asserting himself.
I really don't want to hear that joke again anyway.
And therefore, he is not the kind of guy that you and I would or should trust. He's a used car salesman.
See, that's another thing where it's like, that's just insulting.
Yeah, and I also had something set up where I said he's trying to show you the way into an old car or something like that, and I'm just trying to show you the way. Like I was gonna have like a cool Christian innuendo in there, Don't
just happen from chance, and if they don't happen from chance, then we would all agree that they must happen for a reason.
All right there. The universe didn't just happen from chance, so it must have happened for a reason. That one, actually, I hear all the time, and even people that I have spoken with professionally or just day-to-day, what have you, they will still bring this up, even after it's clearly refuted. I think the reason that it keeps coming up so often, and adjust this as you would want to, Hertzie, but my opinion on it is because it's semantics. And semantics are so easy to hang on to because it doesn't matter what the person argues against. You're still hanging on to your version of that word. So they never really attack what you're keeping that special and safe in your head. This is a mistake we all can make, and it's not just a argument about theology. I'll believe something very strongly, and then 5 years later change my mind, and I'll look back at it and go, the only thing I was hanging on to was my definition of that tiny little word, but it made me wrong about all these other things because I just justified it that way. And whenever you're saying the reason we're here, well, reason has multiple meanings, right? My daughter could dump her vegetables on the floor, and I say, why did you do that? And I'm asking for her purpose for dumping her vegetables on the floor. I'm not asking for the reason. If she says the reason is my thumb slipped, Dad, I'm sorry, it just happens. Yes, I didn't want to eat my vegetables, but this was just a mistake. Well, that is a reason. But another reason could be I didn't want to eat these nasty vegetables. So,
and in the debate, actually, you kind of almost flip between those. You bring them up in the different ways, and I'm like, wait. Oh, so are we going this way, or are we going that way with reason? Pick one.
That's something I get from apologists all the time, is saying, what is the reason for our existence? Or, what is the reason that the Big Bang happened? Or that kind of thing. And it's always, especially with evolution, especially where it'll be the instructions of the DNA, RNA are the reason that your genes do this or that, or the reason that you have these kinds of characteristics. And I'm always thinking, like, wait, are you meaning purpose or the inevitable result of random mutation? Because if you mean purpose, then you're saying there's intent.
Exactly. And what actually makes up our individual characteristics is only about 2% of your DNA. It's a very small percent, and there's a ton of junk DNA that we don't even need anymore. So to say that it happens with a purpose or with a reason, well, then why can't we be like, there's actually animals who can actually get rid of junk DNA. Why can't we do that? Or why wasn't it done without this junk DNA to begin with?
Yeah.
As far as things happening from chance, one thing that always sticks in my mind about that is you would be a completely different person simply if a different sperm or a different egg had met when you were conceived.
Yeah.
Because all those have different DNA parts and such. You can be completely different just by that one little instant.
And even UV radiation during that time of gamete production completely changes the DNA structure. I mean, there's so many random factors that are in place, and depending on how much of a determinist you are about, what is truly random, and things that are not intent is what we mean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For me, it just makes the world that much more amazing that these things just happen to line up in this way to make you the person you are. And that makes you awesome because you just happen to be.
Yeah. Terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah. But exciting.
Did we just get off track completely? We have a mission here, Hertzie.
All right, let's get back to it.
The purpose of the universe. The reason, as it were.
Douchebag.
If he rejects reason, okay, if he rejects reason, then I implore you to consider the premise that does respect reason and
that's where you did that back and forth with reason. Because you're saying that he rejects reason and that the reason of the universe.
Ugh. it seems so just old and worn out, but I mean I really get that all the time. All the time.
Oh, yeah. We did last time we did the talk to an atheist or ask an atheist, we went through a website and there was at least 3 questions on this gotcha that were pretty much that.
So let's get into it. Number 1, to claim that the universe is here from nothing is claiming that from nothing something comes.
Okay, just real quick, what the hell is nothing? I'm so tired of the argument from nothing. What is nothing?
I know. That's a really good question.
And my favorite one is if it is nothing, then how can you say from nothing, nothing comes? Because in this nothing, as if that's even a possibility for something to be in nothing, nothing's not a container because it's nothing. But are you claiming that there are laws and principles existing, so it's not really nothing? So it's kind of like the Lawrence Krauss thing. There's some stuff, because that's their criticism. They're like, well, Krauss didn't say that it's really nothing. Still had gravity and whatever. But obviously you still have rules like from nothing, nothing comes. Why couldn't something pop out of nothing if there's no such thing as any rule saying that something must come from something?
I'm just going with if nothing is coming, where is it coming to or for?
Yeah. And in what time frame is this happening? Where there's no time. Yeah. There's no cause and effect, right? So how could there be something happening? I don't know.
Exactly. It's
Philosophy and science disagree. This is a faith-based claim, and I'm sorry, folks, but I simply do not have enough faith to be an atheist.
That's some old Frank Turek coming at you.
Yes,
Frank
because it takes. I actually had that somebody where they're like, well, what helps you believe in your atheism? And I was like, nothing, because I don't have to work at it.
How does a
It's
mountain
really
feel?
easy.
What color is happy? Like those kind of questions. Like, I don't even. Do you know those words don't mean what those words mean?
The fine-tuning of the universe can, thanks to cosmology, be deconstructed to mathematical principles. If at any contingency the equations of matter in our universe were to be altered by but a hair's breadth, life would cease to exist. If the atomic weak force were to be altered by as little as 1 part out of 10 to the 100th power, we wouldn't be here entertaining my opponent's weak claims. There are
Burn! I thought that part was cool. Okay.
Admittedly, though, because you're like, if it's just a hair difference, I'm like, no, actually, there's a fair amount of differentiatings we can have with our things and still survive.
Yeah, like how they always say, like, the Earth can be closer, like, if it was, like, an inch closer to the sun or an inch away or whatever.
Yeah. No, it's more like a few, I can't remember, but it's a lot bigger than an inch.
Yeah, it's like millions of miles or something.
We could be a lot closer and a lot further.
Whenever they say that about how the distance from the sun, it's hardly away from the sun at all in comparison to the size of the sun. You know, like if it was an orange, we would practically be on the surface. You know what I mean? Like the sun is so large.
Yeah. Humans are a lot more resilient than we think we are.
Yeah, that's a positive note from Hertzie. Oh, hey, real quick, tell them how they can find your show and find you. I forgot to say that at the beginning, because they probably loving hearing you if they haven't heard you before and might want to hear some more of you.
Oh, awesome. I can be found at Atheist Talk. We are on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. You can listen to us if you're local or stream us online or using their app, 950 AM. You can find me also at radio at mnatheist.com, at Atheist Talk on Twitter, and on our Facebook page, Atheist Talk.
So you're like a real radio person.
I have so much help. And I'll be honest, I'm not even on every week. We have a whole group of volunteers who work together to put out this show and make it work. And I'm grateful for every single one of them.
All right, I'm going to play this thing.
All right.
2 possibilities: chance or design, random chance, and no moral absolute, or purpose. And remember why you're...
False dichotomy, chance or design. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Tuning in today, reason. Nature's laws are reasonable. If they were not, science and philosophy couldn't exist. Logic...
As if my show didn't say reason enough. Like, every 5 minutes I'm like, and that's why you have the right... You know, like, I'm already playing on that enough, but... As a Christian, it would be way worse, so my listeners should be grateful for that.
Requires design. Number 3, if you're claiming that moral laws are not provided by a moral lawgiver, then the only conclusion is that morality is subjective. If morality is...
All right, where do you stand on the relativism, objective, subjective thing? You got an opinion on that?
I think to a point morality is subjective because you have people who are sociopaths and such who don't see the world the same way we do. And they're going to choose different morals. Also, I like the idea of being able to choose my own morals. So, for me, I think gay people are fine and pedophiles should go to prison. That's my moral stance.
Yeah. And I think the other thing with talking about morality, I think we get trapped by trying to say it's either subjective or it's objective, or I like to bring in the third one, absolute, because the divine moral lawgiver isn't like divine command theory of morality kind of thing. That's claiming an absolute morality from God, but then God would then just be having his own subjective morality that we're then supposed to follow. So that's just another way of saying morality is subjective, and therefore the Christian faith believes in moral relativism. But either way, I think we get trapped in the sense of trying to say is it this or is it that? I always like to say, well, in which way are you speaking? Because it's subjective and objective, depending on how you are talking about it, because this is not prescriptive, this is descriptive. If we're going to say, obviously my morality is subjective because it's my morals, right? In the same way that you do. But then if you and I both were talking about whether pedophiles should go to prison or something, we agree, then now we've got some kind of objectivity. And then you got another version of, the more like the Sam Harris kind of version where you would say there is a best way to deal with sexual assault of a minor. Whether we know it or not, that best way does exist. And we might be doing the best way, we might not be. That would be another way of saying objective morals. But either way, I mean, the way I'm presenting it is just completely ridiculous. And there's no reason to say that it's the same old argument. If you don't believe my God, then where do you get your morals?
Cheese.
The premise is contradictory. Number one, from nothing, nothing comes. Number two, the universe scientifically is fine-tuned for life. And number three, subjectivism and relativism cannot lead to justice or any reality that we would accept. Therefore,
Now, that one I got right out of the Christian handbook of, well, not the Bible, I mean, but, the debate handbook of keep repeating your arguments, make it plain and simple. You can start off with a bunch of fancy stuff, okay, but repeat it again in an even more simplified way and dumb it down. And what that comes from is right from the pulpit. That is classic preacher style teaching right there.
Yep. Actually, there's a movie I watched. I can't remember the name of it right now. But it was about a great movie, and they actually went through the different things preachers do. And that was one of the big ones, is repeating yourself over and over and over again.
Yes. Start off talking fast and loud with some jokes, and then by the end of it, whenever the piano starts coming in, bring it on down. And folks, I want you to know, and really, they gotta kind of lean in a little bit. And
then you have to go through the
altar call. That's the altar call. Yeah.
Well, first you have to bring in the I know there's problems and kind of the depression portion of it, and then you have to go into the I have the answer, and the answer is this, which is usually give me more money. Then you get to the altar calls.
Yeah, I know some of you out there today.
Creepy.
Rejecting the word of God must explain how something came from nothing, that chance and evolution are able to explain life.
That's just rewording it. He has to explain how something comes from nothing. But I only asserted that, and then I'm saying, well, he has to explain how chance can produce life. It's just horrible straw man. Can we agree to that?
Yes.
Horrible straw man.
That morality is relative, fleeting, and useless. My Bible disagrees. If you cannot prove these 3 points, I would encourage you to accept my argument as open-minded free thinkers as you are, that we came from something, that science explains life, that you have the courage to say that there is a right and a wrong, that you will not live on your knees, that you will not go quietly into that cold night. We will stand and we will lift our hands together to our Creator, our greatest scientist, our lawgiver, our friend, and that subtle voice whispering to you right now. Strengthen yourself in reason and logic.
Jesus, just stop, man.
Micah 3:8, but as for me, I am filled with the Spirit of the Lord.
I had to quote the Bible.
And might. Thank you, and God bless your decision.
What the
Right on the button, Robert.
Right on the button, Robert. Kelly loved that so much. Kelly was just listening to that the whole time, like, yes! Because of the vein popping out of his forehead. Yes, finally! Someone said it.
Oh, my favorite part was don't be on your knees, because I grew up Catholic, and I'm like, are you sure? Because we spent a lot of time on our knees as Catholics.
All right.
I'm going to skip through the Justin thing here.
All right.
Robert spoke of proof, and my obligation in this context.
You know what's funny, though? Is he was trying to actually be like in a professional debate and make good arguments, and I'm just like, you know what you sound like to me? Fart noise. Whatever. All right. And the whole time, I just felt like Justin's on, like he's got his like tweed jacket and, his glasses and his hat, he's like.
And his pipe. Don't forget the pipe.
Yeah. He's like a smart Moby. Like if Moby was a philosophy professor. Because that's the point. These arguments are easy. Mm-hmm. Like it's easy to make the apologist arguments. Anybody can do it.
Oh, can we skip ahead?
If
to what?
infinite power
To your 11-year-old. I know this is a ways in the front.
Naturalistic world unfolding and it calls away. You know, there are whole
No.
swaths of evidence, but because our time
Can we wait till we get there? Because
Yes, we can wait.
I don't know how, Hertzie. I'm not a professional like you, damn it.
I have an engineer who does a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Pay for it.
I'd like to give it a start on the question side. Justin gave an eloquent defense of his position, even though he didn't seem like he needed to.
What does that mean exactly?
That was weird.
We love you, Kelly.
So if you wanted to start for us, Robert, have at it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Look, most of our listeners would understand atheism to be a lack of belief in God, and agnosticism to simply be withholding belief until evidence is presented. Justin, are you an atheist or an agnostic?
That's so much bullshit.
I hate that argument more than any other.
I reject the lack of belief definition of atheism for reasons that I won't go into here, but suffice it to say that I'm an atheist in the sense that I believe that God probably does not exist.
Just to clarify, you kind of tried to twist that.
He tried to answer my question in an honest and open forum. We can't have that.
A little bit, but basically you're an atheist. Is that fair?
Yeah. So there's controversy, right, about the definition of what atheism is. And so all I mean is that in whatever word you want to use for it, my view is that God probably does not exist. If that's an atheist on your definition, then I'm an atheist.
Right. So as far as I presented atheism to be, and most of the listeners would understand atheism to be as a lack of faith in God, then I would respond that you're likely wasting our listeners' time because you wouldn't accept evidence anyway based on your lack of belief. So let me follow that up.
Now that's the one that I faced with my own brother the first time. He's I don't want to say a Baptist minister. He's a preacher of the modern Baptist kind of thing, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And that was his thing. We sat there and we discussed, for some reason, evolution for a long time, which, once again, I do not get why anytime I speak to a fundamentalist Christian, it's got to go to evolution, as if evolution is the reason I'm an atheist, you know, like that. Anyway, but we discussed evolution for a long time, and then at the end of it, he just said, well, you're an atheist, so you're not going to believe God anyway. And, you know, it was that kind of argument of, you have a bias, and there's no getting through to you, so it just invalidates the entire argument, or tries to.
Oh, yeah, which is funny, because they seem to be the ones with more of a bias.
Right, and I think that's the I'm doing it and you're doing it too kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With a question, that one...
I go further than just lack of belief. I assert
All right,
that
well,
God...
I mean, this is my time for questioning, but that may have been a little bit difficult. Here's an easy one. If Christianity were true, would you be a Christian?
So that depends on your definition of Christian. What I believe.
Once again, it seems that we're being offered a lot of difficulty answering the question, though.
Well, okay, so if what we mean by that is that Christianity, if what you mean by Christian is that I would believe that Christianity is true, then yeah, I would be a Christian. But
no,
poor guy.
If it were true, if it were a fact, would you then decide to be a Christian? Would you want to become a Christian? Yes or no?
So I would believe in Christianity, but I would not be a Christian in what that
like he knows where this is going, and he's trying his best to not let it happen.
It's true, you would still reject it. So I hate to do this, but I have a follow-up question here. Why should the audience respect the words of a man that would reject truth?
Well, so there's a misunderstanding going on here. When you say, when you ask me if I would be a Christian, there's different things.
That's just some mean tactics, really. I don't know if there's anything we can criticize in terms of logical fallacies or anything.
I find the character of God in Christianity to be abhorrent, and so I would not seek a relationship with God, even though I knew at that point Christianity was true. So that's hopefully a clear
no. I don't think Christians feel that way, but
what does that have to do with anything?
Well,
here's three quick questions for
that's one of my favorite kind of trying to be gotcha that I hear is, well, if you know it's true, then you you would believe and you'd be a Christian, right? And I'm like, not necessarily the case, because I find a lot of the stuff, if Christianity was true, that means the Bible's true. And there's a lot of stuff in the Bible I disagree with. Not to mention, if God is this all-knowing, all-powerful being who supposedly is also all-loving, but then not all-loving, I have a better morality than he does. I would stop a priest from raping a child, and he obviously doesn't.
Right, exactly. And like the other one is like, well, you believe Satan's real. Does that mean you worship him just because he's stronger than you? Mm-hmm. Why would you think that we would worship God just because we think he's real?
It's like, it's the question of, does he deserve my attention and affection? Honestly, if God and Satan were real, I'd actually probably lean more towards Satan, because he's killed less people and is all about the free will.
And at least he's honest. Mm-hmm. I can't think of a time Satan... Well, is there a time in the Bible Satan lied? I'm sure there is, right?
Well, he's like supposed to be a trickster, but I don't think there's really any proof.
What's a time that he lied? I can't think of a time that he lied.
Yeah, I can't think of one either. Now, granted, if it was the Satan from the Supernatural series, that's a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
Well, he wants to kill all humans.
What is more likely, in your opinion, Justin, that an author wrote a book, or that the book was written by someone that isn't the author, that a painter painted
This is so cliche.
Or that the painting wasn't created by someone or something that isn't the painter, that the universe was created by a creator, or that the universe was created by a non-creator?
Well, on that question, if the other option is...
All right, just my personal opinion, never start answering a debate question with well. That's the only criticism I have of Justin. He did awesome in every other regard, but I'm just saying, never start with well. Like, anytime in a political debate and they're asked like a really hard question, even though, this one's easy for him to answer, but still, and their first thing out of their mouth is always that same thing, right? That same, oh, that's an excellent question. Like, no, it's not. You're stalling for time to think about it while you say that answer, but never go, well.
Well, it's like, isn't it a classic con where you repeat the question to give yourself time to answer it?
Ooh, that's a good idea. Is it a classic con to repeat a question to give yourself time to answer it?
Honestly, I'm not sure. It's like I watched a lot of Leverage, and suppose they were the ones who...
I just did it.
Oh. Womp womp.
Non-creator that fundamentally, definitionally, leaves out the possibility that it could be the creator. So obviously in that question, which is a loaded question, the creator would be the answer. But of course, not only does that question...
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
All right.
I think you would agree that a creator created the universe. Is that fair?
No, I would not.
I'm sorry.
But of course, nothing
I thought
about
that's
your
what you
prior
just
question.
said.
No, nothing about your prior question even suggested that. So,
I'm so looking forward to the part where Kelly comes in.
Yes.
Were you thinking the same thing? I'm just like, come on, Kelly.
When you asked me what's more likely, that a creator did something or that a non-creator created something, well, the second part of that question is incoherent. So the first part of that wins by default in a trivial boxing match. So what I'm saying is that if we're talking about the actual world, I don't even buy the notion that it was created at all. So the question's loaded from the beginning, and it's one that can be rejected outright.
Kent Hovind tried to get me on that one, too.
When you say loaded, you're kind of playing semantics. Let me come at it a little bit simpler for you.
Just a second.
Is that time?
No, not at all. I just there wasn't something answered there, Justin. Kind of got hung up on the universe part, and I understand. Intriguing. Okay. But what about the book and the author and the painting and the painter? Robert did pose those, and I don't think those were addressed.
Justin's like, what the fuck, Kelly?
Robert, go ahead and rephrase the book question there.
Yes, fair enough. What is more likely, in your opinion, that an author wrote a book, or that the book was written by someone that isn't the author, that a painter painted a picture, or that the painting was created by
someone who didn't paint it?
Okay. Can we just solve the whole? Either God created it or it's just chaos. At least that was the way that Kent framed it. I said, well, that's a false dichotomy.
Oh yeah, especially if you look at the human body and our DNA and all that. It's like, if it was created by this all-knowing being, there's a lot of flaws that we have, and I could come up with a much better idea for how humans should be, especially with our world. And we're pretty cool as it is, but I mean, like, there are definitely changes. An exoskeleton would be awesome.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that gets me is, why do we eat through the same hole that we breathe through?
Oh, yeah. That's another good one.
You could do away with the whole choking factor altogether with just 2 holes.
Remember, just like the universe example, the second half of those questions, they're incoherent. You're asking whether or not a book was written by someone who wasn't the author of that book. It's an incoherent concept, right? So by default, the beginning of that question wins, right? But that has, of course, no implication upon what our debate is here today. So this is largely a distraction.
That's the end of my question time.
Okay. All right. I want to discuss some of your arguments that you gave in your opening statement. So the first argument you gave was about the universe, and you talked about how from nothing, nothing comes, right? The universe had to have a cause, and of course, your position is going to be that God is what is ultimately responsible here. Now, this notion that
it's such a funny contrast because he's so serious.
I know.
So let me offer a more precise example that will, I think, make sense of our intuitions, of the sciences, of our real world experience. So here's the principle. It's metaphysically impossible for a concrete object to come into existence by an efficient cause if it lacks a material cause. So essentially what this is saying is that it's impossible for something to occur or to come into existence if it did not, if the pieces that make it up were not already existing. Essentially that they were just rearranged into whatever new thing. So if you talk about a chair, well, who made the chair? It's not that the chair came into being from nothing. It was crafted out of pre-existing materials, out of wood, out of whatever you make a chair out of, right? So the principle here is that it's metaphysically impossible for a concrete object to come into existence if by an efficient cause if it lacks a material cause. What I'm saying essentially is that ex nihilo creation out of nothing is impossible. All things that come into being out of material stuff, pre-existing material stuff. So I actually want to say that God creating out of nothing.
But with God, all things are possible.
So I actually think that this argument supports my view.
That's what I should have said.
Because if theism entails a kind of God creating out of nothing, and that's impossible, well, then that supports atheism.
I absolutely agree with every point you made,
Really?
And I think that you're making one fatal flaw in the same way that the Bible references if you build your house on sand, your house is going to collapse inevitably. We would all accept that. That's
Except for some people do have houses that are on sand.
Who?
If you go to like the islands and such, they have those houses that are on stilts and such.
Oh yeah.
And it's on a beach. So I mean, is it the most practical for like if you go to the Middle East? Is it very practical there? No, but in some places, I mean.
They thought that was the whole world. So remember, Satan took him to the top and could see everything. Took Jesus up to the top or something of the world, and then the flood.
Yeah.
When Iraq got flooded, allegedly, like the whole world was flooded.
Well, and I get that their world was tiny, but it is one of those things where it's like it's such a simple thing to go, oh yeah, but these guys did the house on the sand. It can happen, and it works pretty well.
It's a good point. Yeah. It's another one of those, like whenever it says when Jesus is talking about, I think he was talking about faith, and he says we don't know from where the wind wispeth or to where it goeth, or whatever the wind that begat the what have you that goeth wherewithal, or the Bible speak. But we do understand when we get it.
we have pretty good ideas as to what's going on with our weather patterns nowadays. It's
temperature changes and atmospheric pressure, and
it's God of the gaps.
It's explainable.
The more we explain, the smaller God becomes, and the less he controls. Which is why Christians can't argue a lot of those kind of things anymore.
We would all accept that. That's obvious. That's common sense.
Not to hurt you, it's not.
But in the same way, your foundation is flawed, sir. in the sense that you are using laws that were defined for man, the same way that sin was defined for man, in the same way that morality was defined for man. You're using the physical laws of the universe that were constructed for us.
Oh, real quick though, that's the most pleasurable and satisfying thing to do when debating a believer, is to use their Bible back against them, but not necessarily like with any point where, they'll say, yeah, but this, and you go, but this verse said that, so you can't say, no, but use it in that way, but you don't want to build your house upon the sand, and I believe that your message is on the sand itself. And just keep throwing little things like that out there, and just watch them just cringe. Because to them, that has value. To us, it's just funny, and it's kind of annoying. Stop using the Bible to prove the Bible. But to them, throwing those out are just smacks in the face.
I would love for there to be a debate, and each side, it could even be, one of the smaller, just evolution debates, and it's each side says, okay, but you can't use one book. Because that the evolutionist is okay, you can't use the Bible, and then their entire thing falls apart.
They would just use books that quoted the Bible. They'd be like, Lee Strobel said this.
Except for me, it's that's still technically using the Bible, because it goes back. With you could say, okay, you can't use anything with Charles Darwin. Okay, fine. We have plenty of people who tried to prove him wrong and went, well, okay, he was right, but he was wrong about that.
That's interesting. Where if you say, okay, you can't use the Bible, but I can't use Origin of the Species by natural selection. They might even kind of be tempted. I mean, obviously they couldn't do it, but they might even be tempted to go, okay, all right, that's reasonable, because to them they think that that's evolution.
Yeah, it's no. There's
they
so
call it
much
Darwinism.
more.
That's my favorite thing whenever somebody's like, oh, so you're a Darwinist? Wait, what's a Darwinist? What do you mean? Am I an Einsteinist because I believe in relativity? What are you talking about? Darwinist?
So that we could function and use our lives to glorify our Lord and Savior. You're using these laws to try to define the
people really believe that
ontological nature of the divine. Define the laws for himself, that wouldn't make sense. And for you to make this claim, you would have to say that God created the laws with which he exists. How could that even be so if he existed eternally?
Okay, that actually is not a bad argument.
I'm trying to wrap my head around all
of
it.
Okay, so God created all the laws. So therefore, he is not, the laws were not designed for him. He wouldn't be constrained by the very laws of the universe that he created.
Okay, then I have to ask about human law, because we put in our own laws, but does that mean that the person who created those laws is above the law?
No.
Or the people who uphold
God's
those.
special.
My thing is, if you're going to make rules, you also got to follow your rules.
The problem I see with that kind of answer, when you say that these laws are for humans, these things I'm referring to here, what you're doing is you are implicitly bringing in God in the back door and therefore inserting the existence of God into your premise.
Yeah, I was wondering that too. That was totally gay. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be gay.
No, it doesn't have to be gay. There's plenty. Back doors are open for everybody who consents.
My thing here is, if he's above the law, right? Mm-hmm. Then why did he have to die for our sins? That one never made sense to me. There's rules that he has to follow.
Yeah.
Or this whole he loves the smell of burning meat. What the hell is that?
Okay, he's above the laws he made for humans, but he has his own laws. So where do those laws come from? Is there another thing on top of
God's God? Above him is a turtle.
Godception.
Godception? Or if you say, well, no, he designed that system as well. Well, then why didn't he create a world where it didn't have sin? Then there wouldn't be free will. So what law? What law is that?
Well, and then with the free will, it's he knows everything you're going to do, but he gave you free will. So from the moment you're conceived, he knows that he's going to be throwing you in hell. So why not just flush it out early and get it over with?
Exactly.
Which is to beg the question against my argument. What I'm saying is that the causal principles you referred to were vague. I sharpened those down, and now you're wanting to resist the notion of bringing in causal principles. Well, you can't.
He's 100% accurate.
When who first started to talk about causal principles, I just improved the argument for you, and it turns out that once you do improve it, it supports my point.
Would you accept that physics is based on cause and effect?
Set up.
Yeah. I mean, obviously some of it, yeah.
Okay, well, I would say all of it, but that's fair enough. In that same sense, even with quantum physics, as it were, cause and effect is not just significant, it's a necessary role in how we understand the mathematics.
Getting into some Deepak Chopra coming. Anytime somebody brings up the quantum physics and they're arguing for God, like, you know it's going to be some bullshit coming.
And every cause,
but there is no reason.
Every effect is material, right?
Absolutely. But God is not, and therefore your sense of cause does not play a factor in the eternal. And your sense of effect does not play a factor in the end material. And you're forgetting the most important factor here, the spiritual.
Sure, but none of that has any weight toward making any of that true. You're just making claims here.
It's so funny because he's so right. He's like, even with that long pause, the spiritual, and he's like, all right, but that made no sense. What was that?
I was going to say, because I've listened to that a couple of times, and each time I'm like, I hear the words that are coming out of your mouth, but they're not making any sense.
They sound like you're passionate about it, but that has no meaning. What was that? That one movie? Okay, what's the guy that was in Click?
I don't think I've seen that one.
Adam Sandler.
Okay.
And then
was that the one with the remote?
Yeah. All right, but okay, yeah. Back when he was kind of funny, or maybe we were just younger. He did that one movie where like he had to go back to school. What was that one?
Yes. Oh, what was that?
What's the name of that? Everybody that's listening right now is like, Billy Madison. Billy Madison.
Yes.
Everybody's screaming it at their device. But okay, so Billy Madison, yeah. And whenever he goes and gives that speech, and at the end of it, like the moderator's like, we're all stupider having heard that. Thank you.
Right, so the original point here was that you were using causal principles to try and prove God. And I was showing that once you actually look at the causal principles, they actually make God impossible.
I don't know how familiar you are with Latin, but the term atheist is not too hard to understand. It's atheist. It's no theist. So whenever you're saying I'm making a claim, no, I am reasserting a claim.
So I was trying to go for the kind of self-righteous arrogance that I often get from Christians, and even whenever it's the nice ones. Even the ones that are very respectful, and you're like, look, I can tell you're a nice guy. You know, we're going to have a very polite discussion, obviously. You know, they still have that arrogance about them, and I don't think they realize it because they can't imagine a reality where there isn't an absolute truth that they can attain, where there isn't some sense of certainty. Like you and I, we live in a world. Like, are you certain? Would you say, Hertzie, you're certain about anything? Like absolute certain about anything?
Well, I'm certain right now that the sun is in my eyes, but that's only because the sun is actually in my eyes. But you, I mean, you could be wrong. Not to get all Sci 10, but I mean, you could be wrong about. You could be delusional. So, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Like if someone were to ask, like, well, what would convince you there's a God? I'm like, what if God appeared right in front of me right now? I would believe it. But would I? No, I wouldn't believe that shit because I'd be like, well, I don't know. Is it more likely that I'm seeing something or that the laws of physics have just stopped for me, you know? So obviously, even in that scenario, I'd be like, all right, what pills have I taken today? What was the last thing that happened to me? Did I hit my head? Did somebody slip shrooms into that muffin I ate?
Yeah. Well, there was that burning bush. That was the first time someone saw God, right? There was some drugs being smoked there.
I was going to say, I don't know if that was the first time Moses spoke to God.
I don't think Adam ever saw God. And when Job saw God, it was like a tornado. And those are the only two things before Moses, right?
What about Noah?
Didn't see him.
Yeah, so it's like this disembodied voice, and I would actually trust that a lot less than seeing something appear.
Was Moses before Abraham? Who was the guy that fought him? There was like, Jacob. Jacob like fought him. Like they wrestled.
Good Lord, this is like, admittedly, I've not read the Bible.
Jacob,
I tried,
like
but
literally,
it gets really boring.
It says he wrestled with him. The first time you look at it, you're like, yeah, well, as a Christian or something, if you're reading it, like, we've all wrestled with God sometime. But no, he really wrestled with, like, he hit him in the balls. But it says he slapped him in the hollow of his leg because Jacob wouldn't let him go. But I mean, hollow of his leg.
Yep.
He hit him in the nuts.
Cheated.
Yeah, God couldn't get away from him. I mean, it's just like those old Mesopotamian stories. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. The fact that they can't see that, like everybody tries to compare it to Zeus or God is kind of like a demigod, like Hercules or something. Like no. That's a fine comparison, but look at those old classic Mesopotamian gods. That stuff lines up perfectly. Epic of Gilgamesh and Noah and all that. Like, it's amazing.
Or some of the Egyptian stuff, too. Because Moses, Aaron Ra has stated that some of the, I think it was some of the Moses stories actually line up really well with some of the Egyptian stories.
That
almost
name,
perfection.
Aaron Ra, like, that's even, like, that sounds Egyptian-y. Where did he get that? Is that his real name?
I don't know.
I want to ask him that.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he had a pseudonym or maybe changed his name at some point.
Just that name is so cool. It's hard to believe like anybody would name their kid Aaron Ra.
A claim that all humanity throughout all history, and you can go back to any point in history, any point in archaeology, and find that there have been forms of divination, of theological concepts all along.
This is just bandwagon fallacy.
And I think it is. If you'll let me finish, the point is that you are a theist, no theist. Theism is the respected approach, the null set, as philosophical terms would apply here. You are rejecting it, and therefore, whenever you say I'm making a claim, I'm simply reasserting a well-known fact. You are rejecting it. You are the one making the claim here, sir.
Okay, we're going to move on now. This is my question time.
Good job.
So let's talk about your third argument, the moral obligations argument. So philosopher J.L. Mackie points out one problem with attempting to account for moral obligations by placing them at the feet of God. He writes, quote, "The commands of a legitimate ruler do not create obligations. If such a ruler tells you to do X, this makes it obligatory for you to do X, only if it is already obligatory for you to do whatever that ruler tells you. The same applies to God. He can make it obligatory for us to do Y by so commanding, only if there is first a general obligation for us to obey him." So the notion that we can have all obligations grounded at the feet of God is actually incoherent, because we don't have the general obligation for us to do what a God would say in the first place. And that is an obligation that cannot be grounded in God. And so if we have to allow this, then we have to say that there are some obligations that are not grounded in God. And if we allow for that conceptually, then there's, of course, room for the naturalist to say, well, there are, why not several obligations that are kind of intrinsic, that are irreducible normative truths. So essentially the point I'm making here is that most meta-ethical theories out there do not invoke a divine hand, and nor should they. Apologists that I think forward these arguments, they do little other than show their ignorance of the state of contemporary meta-ethics. This third argument is just a doozy.
Where you're going with that is really fascinating. Talking about ethics, and I'm sorry if I come off a bit cocky here. That's not my intention. I want to have the humility
that is totally
of
my intention.
My Lord and Savior, as he would instruct me to do so. But I'm sorry. I feel very confident in my answer here, because I have the moral ground to do so. And allow me to explain before you pass judgment, before you say. Really,
that's why they get so mad whenever we bring up slavery in the Bible. I think though, is because they're in this place of this like warm little center of comfort with it, knowing that they're following the right moral system. And then whenever we're like, yeah, but look at this misogyny in the Bible, or look how it talks about slavery, or how, what should you do if you marry a woman and she's not a virgin?
Well, it also proves how fragile some of their constructed morality really is, because there are some people, it's like, if you look and say, no, seriously, it says you can't do this thing, and they're like, but it's okay if I do it. And I'm like, no, because if it's okay if you do it, then it's okay that this person did it and this person did it. And really, honestly, we should just say, yes, this is okay.
Yeah.
Specifically, I'm looking at the whole marrying a non-virgin. Obviously, slavery is never okay.
Right. Or they'll really stick to the gay stuff, like there. But there's just as much in the Bible and referencing slavery, if not more.
There are more stuff about eating shellfish.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm not giving up my lobster.
Well, I'm standing on that.
God can hate shellfish all he wants. I love it.
Stand me up at the gates of hell, but I won't back down on my lobster.
Nope.
Do I have the authority to exert my physical will on another human being, even if they're not doing something wrong, even if they're not doing
Why am I asking
violent?
questions?
I'm not. Is this your question time or is this my question time?
It's your question time. I
He
just
did
thought
call you
it
out on
might
that.
be easier to explain, but it's okay. I'll continue. It was last Thursday. My sweetheart of a daughter was playing soccer with me in the front yard, and the ball just, I shouldn't have kicked it as hard as I did, but I was trying to impress her, and it went right across the street. She goes running after it, all right? She's 11 years old. She doesn't know any better. She was doing nothing wrong as far as she understood. Car was coming right down the road, and guess what? I grab her by her arm, and I yank her back, right back onto the lawn, okay? In that scenario...
What 11-year-old has not figured out to look both ways before they cross the damn street?
I don't know.
Like, if you said that they were 5 or 6, I could see this, but I'm like, no, at 11, you know how to cross a street. You know to look.
I don't know. I was on spur of the moment. I had to make something up quick.
She probably would have said, you know what? That guy was being a jerk. He grabbed me by my arm, and he pulled me and yanked me, and it kind of hurt a little. And she would be morally justified to do so.
Do you have a defense to this, though?
Limited understanding of morality. But she doesn't have my...
I feel like this is one of the better arguments for theism.
It's easy for us to judge God in our limited time frames, in our limited understanding of morality, but he is the moral lawgiver. And sometimes he yanks us and pushes us, and sometimes
his answer's perfect, though.
Understand in ethics.
You've gone so far afield of the original argument here. So your original argument asserted that moral laws, that moral obligations, they are found in the nature of God. This is a philosophical claim about metaethics. Right now we're talking about normative ethics. This is a sidestep here. So I wanted to talk about metaethics, which is what your argument was originally about. Is that the argument you want to continue with?
Can I here just for a sec?
Sure.
Yeah, Justin, you brought up the idea of obligatory rules.
Wait, Justin was destroying me right then, and Kelly's like, "Hold on, guys."
But it's like I understand the argument of, well, I know better, so I can teach you. The problem is that, like, as I've gotten older and done, like, the adult thing, I'm like, you get to a point where you're like, oh, nobody knows what the heck is going on.
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing is, I think we're missing, like, my whole argument there is if she had a million years to think about that moment and it never proceeded, right? Like that one moment where I grabbed her arm and then her reality stopped. And she's living in, like, the TV version of just white light. And she's able to contemplate this for a long time. It's the concept of saying, like, if she could reason this out for a long period of time, she still would feel oppressed, offended, physically violated in some way. You know, he hurt my arm, he yanked me, he had no right to do, because she's unaware of the car. That's the whole point, is that no matter how much she reasons this out, I still knew more than her, and I was acting in her best interest. And that argument of saying, well, God knows more than us no matter how much we reason, man's reason falls short of the glory of God and blah, 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 blah. The problem with this argument to me is that she would be justified in thinking that. Like, we're forgetting, like, we're acting as if that changes anything. That doesn't change anything. If all I know is this current reality, and you're like, yeah, but there's God beyond it, well, that doesn't mean that it's reasonable for me to think it. Knowledge is justified true belief. It's not just true belief. So if I believe that I can walk through walls, and I can walk through walls, it doesn't make it reasonable for me to walk through the wall or attempt to, because it's not a justified thing to believe. So I would only be reasonable in going my entire life, as silly as it might sound. The only rational thing for me to do is not run smack dab into the wall, because there's no reason for me to think I can walk through a wall. Maybe I can, but until some whatever scenario you want to make where I go through the wall somehow, but still, until that happens, I shouldn't believe it. There's no evidence for that. And there was no evidence for her to understand why I'm jerking her arm. And there's no evidence for God.
To add another caveat to it, it's also one of those where you have to look at who she knows that you, her father, are doing something. During this infinite amount of time to contemplate it, there's going to be at least for a moment going, well, I know it was my dad. Dad normally does something for a reason.
Yeah.
So it's like, and this is with infinite time. So there's going to be, because she's going to have time to think about a lot of different things. Because she knows that you're there.
Good point. I exist.
You exist, and I'm hoping that there's enough evidence in her life to know that you're not going to do something like that without reason.
I do a lot of dumb stuff as a dad, so I don't know.
That's every parent. I do dumb stuff with my cats. That's as closest to parenting as I'll get.
It's the same thing. It's the same.
I wouldn't say it's.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's what Robert was getting to.
Right. He's talking about the philosophical foundation of moral duties.
Right. So that obligatory rules, I think Robert was trying to get across that idea that someone with a more complete knowledge of the situation might make up rules that we don't particularly agree on at the moment, but later upon reflection might be advantageous.
Right, which addresses a very different question from the philosophical foundations of duties.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get into the...
That's my only concern.
Okay. So please restate your question. Maybe I missed a point, but I think I defended ethics properly.
Well, I'm not.
No.
Well, actually, at this point, I'm really confused about what your argument is the claims your argument is making.
Absolutely.
So
and I think that's the problem, is that the atheistic philosophy of ethics is quite confusing.
No, that's not.
That's a pretty good answer, actually.
What we're talking about here. I'm saying I'm not clear on what your argument is, because the statements that you are making, that you are making in defense of your argument and in the unpacking of the initial argument, they appear to be going every which way. They're not coherent. I've not been given an argument to bite into.
Can I offer an explanation that maybe you'll accept?
Sure.
That is that my understanding of ethics and morality comes from a lot of investment in prayer and Bible study.
And that's what I hear a lot, is if you speaking to your imaginary friend gives you some kind of authority in this discussion,
Mm-hmm. Obviously, we just haven't thought about morality ever.
Yeah, well, it's this appeal. It's this appeal to a divine source of knowledge thing, and I get that all the time whenever I show someone a biblical contradiction, and the response is always, "Right, but you're not reading this with the power of the Holy Spirit." And I'm like, "Are you telling me that you have abilities that I do not have? Like you have a form of magic that I don't have?" Well, you can't say magic because they're whoa, it's not magic, But still, like you have something equivalent to what I would understand to be magic. Whenever you read the Bible, you have special thought powers. Is that really what you think happens in your life? And the answer is yes. That's really what they think. They want to present the Bible and Scripture as truth to you. But if you find something wrong with it, then they say, well, you don't have the Holy Spirit. Well, then why are you using the Bible at all? If I have to have the Holy Spirit to believe the Bible, then why would I believe the Bible absent the Holy Spirit? And then how do you justify your salvation if you believed without the Holy Spirit? If the Holy Spirit is required to understand the Scripture, and faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God, what the hell were you doing believing in the first place? Your faith is in vain, and you never accepted Christ your personal Savior, because you didn't have the original truth either. Did I get angry? I'm sorry. Who am I arguing with exactly? Myself?
Kinda.
And you're coming from a place that you have not invested that kind of time as Christ has required, as the Bible has asked for. So whenever you say, I find this to be confusing, Well, of course you do, Justin, and that's okay. Nobody's judging you for that. My Lord is...
You're judging him.
My Lord is about acceptance, and he accepts your ignorance. And I'm sorry I used the word ignorance. I don't mean offense by that. But
here's the
you're going to have to put in the Bible study to get to these difficult things.
Right. So here's the question. Here's the point here being made. In the context of a debate, we can talk about what you believe, and that's fine. But what this originally came to was an argument that you made about moral obligation to the existence of God. That was the inference you were making. Your beliefs and how you believe you came to these things, that's irrelevant to the soundness of that argument. I've been attacking the soundness of that argument, and you've been moving the goalposts and changing the subject to normative ethics, to where you get your moral reasoning from. Those are secondary issues to the core argument that you initially made in your presentation, and that's what I wanted to focus on.
I'm sorry, I thought they were foundational.
When we're talking about duties, that was what the center of your argument was.
Is your claim that the origin of morality is not consequential to how we determine what is moral? Is that your claim?
Well, they're certainly related. So in that sense, they're consequential. Sure.
Yeah, and I don't think they're just simple relations or correlations.
But
I think it's causal. I think that your whole claim of causality comes right back full circle to the causality of our morality.
So notice that, again, we keep going in these bizarre directions.
That made no sense.
No.
I mean, it kind of made sense. But
the coherence of
just
talking
rhymed.
about and grounding moral duties in God, you started to talk about how you get your moral sentiments from Bible study and prayer and how this connects with the divine. This all, of course, assumes God exists. So this is nothing but begging the question.
And the crazy thing about a believer that hears that would be like, burn!
Mm-hmm.
But upon more thinking about it, well, you know what? That really didn't make any sense. It's the same as when she's like, imagine if he was president. You know, when in the debates when Hillary said that, and Trump's like, you'd be in jail. And everybody's like, whoa, yeah. It's like, well, hold on. Think about what he really said. He's going to lock up his political opponent in a democratic election.
Yeah.
You actually don't want to cheer to that, do you?
But then there's people who actually would want that kind of thing, and it's...
Yeah.
Well, let's not get political.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those are the same people that are like, let's lock up anybody in a Black Lives Matter protest. You know, that kind of like, they're just fascists. They don't know what fascism is.
No, but they want it.
God exists. So this is nothing but begging the question. This is, of course, a logical move that is not allowed in a debate like this. So at this point, I fear my time has run out, and I've not been even able to get you to provide a coherent argument in the first place with which I can interact. So that's a missed opportunity, I think.
Okay, guys, we're a little past time, so at this point we should get into the final closing statement.
I would say we could probably stop with that. Because, I mean, the closing, we don't really present anything new. We just reiterate our previous arguments.
Oh, yeah.
And my whole point with wanting to have you on was so that we could present the flaws of the argument, which I expected it to be you and I more or less going back and forth just saying, this is this logical fallacy, that's that logical fallacy, you know. But we ended up just goofing off the whole time. I mean, we did that, but we also, it was a fun time. I'm glad you were here.
Like I said, my goal was to make fun of you this whole time, so I think I accomplished that goal.
Would you say that we sufficiently explained all the errors in my arguments?
I think we talked about them fairly well and explained the kind of the other side and in the retrospect looking at it.
I really appreciate you having the time to come and see us. Tell us one more time about how we can
hear my well when I'm on, because I have, like I said, I have a group of volunteers, so we all kind of take turns, I guess, sort of. Anyways, but we are Atheist Talk, and you can find us at AM 950. You can stream us online if you're not local, or you can find us on podcast under Atheist Talk under iTunes, Google Play, probably a couple other ones. We also have a Patreon if you're interested. We just had our first patron-only episode. I was very excited about that. But yeah, we're a live radio show in the middle of Minnesota.
Wasn't Hertzie hilarious? I'm so glad she helped us out today. Also, thank you to Kelly Clemenson and Justin Schieber. This was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. Music today was brought to you by Jason Camo. Find more of these jams at aloststateofmind.com. Swing by patreon.com/right and throw $1 at the show for us today. Learn more at therighttoreason.com. I am out of here, people. Thanks for listening. Next week, we will be talking to famous stand-up comedian and former candidate for state senator, Steve Hill. It's going to get political, and that's going to be awesome. Between now and then, keep fighting for your right to reason.